framework with Lean in that it's got sustainable design content and intention, but they're not the same thing. So what's in the IGCC? I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the details of the code. The logos you see underneath the IGCC logo are, of course, the International Code Council, the American Institute of Architects, and ASTM. The three of us were sort of the original cooperating sponsors, and then we were joined by ASHRAE, IES, and the USGBC, who were also working collaboratively with the ICC to produce this model code. So some of the concepts, it does use the model code approach, so it's meant to be flexible for jurisdictions. They can take the code and change it. They can choose what are called jurisdictional electives. There's a special chapter, Chapter 3, that is dedicated to a jurisdiction's choice on how tough they want the code to be and what to include in it. And that also includes a provision for enacting or adopting standard 189.1 to use as the body of the code rather than the code itself, which is very, very interesting from a political and technical standpoint. There are minimum and advanced levels of performance for both entry level and really advanced design. So I mentioned outcome-based codes before. There are case studies emerging of buildings that are approaching net zero energy. Getting to net zero energy buildings is no simple task. It's certainly not in the purview of a prescriptive-based code. We're talking really complex design, diverse teams, lots of collaboration, some financial gymnastics probably, and in order to do that and to sort of mandate that sort of thing, you're going way beyond a normal, very base level green code. So the IGCC actually enables jurisdictions to choose if they want a light green code or if they want a really dark green code. And it is designed certainly with federal, state, and local laws in mind. In the local case, it would be about flexibility. In the federal case, there's a response to the Energy Independence and Security Act. There are provisions in that act about 90% compliance for states, needing a certain stringency. I believe the last language I saw is 2004, 90.1, to be devised a certain percentage. All that was taken into consideration when writing the first version of the code. So some of the chapter topics, I want to point out a couple in particular. Again, one is the Chapter 3. It's actually kind of a roadmap to the code. It's where jurisdictional electives are chosen, but also project electives. It's an interesting case that with Cal Green, you can count on one hand how many buildings were built compliant to Cal Green before it was made mandatory. So I'm really curious if, when states start to adopt the IGCC, if there will actually be any projects that choose to make their own code tougher by choosing project electives. But that's in fact what project electives can do. You can say, okay, this is the base IGCC, but what we're going to do is we're going to improve water efficiency by so much percent, and we're going to beat the energy target by such a percent. And the project can actually check, the project team can actually check these things, go in for permit, and then the building officials can turn around and say, okay, well, you're deciding to make it tougher. So it's a fascinating idea for incentive programs. A jurisdiction could, let's say, tie extra project electives to property tax reduction. Who knows? I mean, the sky's the limit, and it's limited only by creativity when it comes to assets added to the design process and to code compliance. So the other chapter I wanted to specifically mention is the commissioning chapter. For those of you who have been involved in commissioning and specifying for lead projects, you'll understand how complex commissioning can be, and also there are different breeds of commissioning. You've got whole building commissioning, you've got envelope commissioning, mechanical systems commissioning, and sometimes you have architects who are able to do it, and the firms that offer the services, and way early in the design process, which is of course highly valuable when you're trying to create high performance buildings. But then also you have a conception of commissioning that is sort of a set of checks and balances along the way in the design process. And the code is the simpler version of that. So it's It's called commissioning, but it's really pre and post occupancy checks. There are not technical approvals made by the code official the way that the code is currently written, but there's an acceptance form between the owner and the jurisdiction acknowledging that these things have been done. And there's first and foremost, there was a discussion about sort of fox guarding the hen house, about whether or not architects can really commission their own projects and should they, and what that means. And boy, that was a can of worms. That was a huge discussion. And the result of the discussion, one of the results, was that there's a new term in the code. It's the design professional and responsible charge. And architects have decided, at least in the context of the Green Code, that we want to own commissioning. Now, again, for those of you who are actually involved in commissioning, you might scratch your heads a little bit as to what that might mean for architects if we take that on. But for those of us that are have the technical prowess to do it, and we offer these services, we can do it. There's nothing in the code that precludes an architect or an engineering firm from being self-commissioning, essentially.
Does that include like verification of energy savings?
Post-occupancy verification, yes, but again, it's not, the inspection isn't necessarily done by the code official. It would be a certificate that's turned in, after the project is complete. The outcome stuff is not worked out. The outcome path for the IGCC is not complete. I've been part of a working group with AIA and the New Buildings Institute that are working diligently trying to figure out this issue. How do you make a structure for a model structure for a jurisdiction to actually police outcomes? It's really tough. I mean, no matter how you think about it, it's really a complex problem. So a little bit about why or how also, the ICC with its partners embarked on this journey. And from the technical side, the first version of the code, the document that was given by ICC staff to the Sustainable Building Technology Committee to develop this thing in its first version, was based on Cal Green. Cal Green was worked on by USGBC and based on heavily on LEED. So there's a genetic link between provisions in LEED and what you got in the IGCC. So they're related. They're not the same thing, but they're distant relatives. The Code Council in this whole process has, gotten a clearer and clearer picture of what creating a green model code means. They're getting feedback from their jurisdictions, their members, they're leading this effort, and they do have a better understanding, I think, about why IGCC is necessary. There are global reasons, there are environmental reasons. The jurisdictions are asking for it. You've got state laws, you've got federal law. A lot of forces at play that have led to the IGCC. So one thing about model code that you're not going to find in the standard is a model ordinance, and that exists in all the I codes in the first chapter, typically the administrative chapter. It's meant again to be flexible for jurisdictions, and the idea is that it can only really has any chance of being enforced if you give a jurisdiction something to work with. Enforcement is a tough issue. Only in the very base life safety codes would you call it easy. I mean, and then you're talking about a label inspection and some sign-offs. But in the case of energy efficiency, mechanical equipment, things are working not independently, but as a system, a building system. It's compliance and enforcement is getting more complicated, but it's going to change. I think this is adopted nationwide. It's going to really change the role of the building official. And it's going to change the relationship between the building official and the design team. And it's going to change the mechanics within the design team. Well, from a enforcement standpoint, it's about going from a checklist of milestones to kind of an iterative process, similar to what you may have seen if you've looked at the integrated project delivery materials that AIA has worked on over the years. You look at a problem, you come back to it, you kind of, it's not driven in a very linear way, it's kind of iterative. you have to have these conversations. Well, in terms of like the jurisdiction, you may need to have the fire official at the table. In pre-design, I mean, you may need to have the, other officials from the jurisdiction involved way earlier in a phase that you never would normally before you're going for a permit to make sure that you're lining up with the commissioner requirements, that some of the more complex technical issues are taken care of, so you don't waste a whole lot of money going in a direction that's not going to comply. This is a different kind of, I think, technical compliance that architects are used to. And if you read the code, and I hope you will, if you haven't already, you'll see that it definitely is an umbrella over those codes. There are things happening in the state that are not in normal practice. When I talk about the changing standard of care, there's a big difference between what we consider a minimum today or yesterday and what we're going to consider a minimum in the future. There's a whole set of professional practice implications involved in that. But not pointing to specific issues because the model code actually isn't finished. And so to point to specific enforcement issues is tough, but just knowing the complexity and that as things become more complex, we tend to know less and the risk goes up, which is not a good scene. I know I anticipate that there will be a whole different set of expectations between the building official, between the city and the department. So, talk a little bit about Chapter 3, the ability of the jurisdiction to choose Standard 189. It's literally a checkbox. Yes, no. 189 applies, it doesn't apply. There are many sort of social and political reasons and also technical reasons. I think that the decision was made, the agreement was made between ICC and ASHRAE to do this. I think that it makes a lot of people that have put together the standard very happy, because there's years and years of work that went into Standard 189. It's an incredibly valuable document for jurisdictions that have chosen to already start using it. They see it as a comprehensive pre-building code. But in this way, it can sort of be part of the ICC family of codes, especially for states that are doing statewide adoptions of all the I codes at once. They can loop in the IGCC, and they also get the value of the use of Standard 189. So, as I mentioned before, it's 189 is an ANSI consensus developed standard. It's a little bit different than the ICC process. From site location to energy use to recycling, the standard addresses similar topics as the IGCC. And where the standard is adopted by the jurisdiction, the administrative provisions of IGCC Chapter 1 are applicable for consistency in administering all the other adopted I codes in the jurisdiction. So while the technical content and the sustainability measures, if you chose 189, would come from 189, all of the administrative aspects of the code would come from the IGCC. So you still need the IGCC book